Thank you very much for the introduction and for coming here today. So I will talk about the effects of polymer entanglement on material properties. So this is joint work with my collaborators at UCSB. The work I will talk about today is joint with Ken Millett and Paul Atzberger. And I might have enough time to talk a little bit about my work with Kevin Plaxco from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, and maybe very little at the end about my work with the Department of Chemical Engineering and Glenn Fredrickson and Chris Delaney. Okay, so entanglement. Entanglement appears in many physical systems. So, for example, you can have entanglement in the cytoskeleton. This is supposed to be shown in the first, in A, that figure. So there you have, that is in the cell, you have many different polymers, you have different lengths, different flexibilities, you have active filaments. So it's a very complex system. You might have entanglement in representations of data, something like what you see in B. You might have entanglement of single macromolecules like DNA, for example. DNA can be knotted, and that can lead to disease. You can have entanglement in filaments like textile. And there you see the mechanical results of having entanglement. You have clothes you wear. They are kept together by the entanglement. Or you can have metal weaves. They are kept together because of the entanglement. And you might have even at a different length scale. So we have started at a very small length scale and we keep increasing. And then this is a simulation of black matter filaments. So there too you have filaments that can be entangled, and that fact can lead to interesting properties. So I will talk mostly to what is related to entanglement of A, of many macromolecules. So more precisely, I will talk about my work on entanglement in polymers. So you have polymers we see in everyday life. So for example, silly putty is a material that kids play with, and they can make it look like a cube. They leave it on a table. It's like a solid. And then you can go there 2-3 days after, and this has started to melt, or maybe a week, I don't know, and this starts to melt. So under different time scales, you have different responses of this material. And that is why they are so interesting to study and so useful. For example, plastic boxes are, the water that we all have, these are made out of polymers. So they have wide use because of these wide properties. And the question is, how can we control these properties? Usually what people do, what engineers have done is they have just a list of trial and error things. And so then they combine all that to create a material the way they would like to, right? We would like to do something more sophisticated and be able to predict what the macroscopic properties will be from the microstructure, from adding a few hydrogen bonds. How will that affect the properties of the material? So, when we study then polymer properties, then one can see the effect of entanglement arising. So you have many chains, all of them entangled to each other like a spaghetti, and you want to understand how they move and how that affects their mechanical properties. And the idea is that if you imagine that one chain, the one highlighted in there, it tries to move, and suppose the other ones are fixed around it, then it cannot move anywhere it wants, but it has to diffuse within this imaginary tube-like region formed by the surrounding obstacles. And then one can measure, by creating this tube, one can measure this width of the tube, let's say the radius, and see from that what are the different critical times for the motion. Diffusion within that radius, let's say, and then the time it takes for it to reptate, to go out of this tube and find its way out of the entanglements. So this simple idea has been very useful in describing polymer response. And so there have been several algorithms that are applied. One of them is the Z1 algorithm. And what it does is you take this first picture is a snapshot of a 3D simulation of a polymer melt. And you apply a contour reduction algorithm until you make the underlying entanglement appear. So you see then how all these are interconnected. Okay? And then from that you can recover, it is something like creating this central axis of the tube. And from that you can get information about how many such contacts you create, you have in your material, how many, what is the distance in between them. And just these numbers, they have been important and included into theories for polymer dynamics successfully. Okay, however, we see this is a very local information, just a number of contacts, very discrete local information, and it has to do with a very small scale. What about Edwards from the 60s noticed that we might have things going on in a bigger scale. So things might be linked that are not close to each other, like these two. Maybe there are other entanglements in between that doesn't allow us to see that there is also some link formed in the bigger picture. So how can we account for that? And then we think of knots and links. This reminds us of knots and links, which we can find in topology. So a knot is a simple closed curve in space, okay, which does not intersect itself anywhere. A link is 2 or 3 or more simple closed curves in space that don't intersect each other. And we define an equivalence between the knots and links to say that two are equivalent, they are the same thing, if we can go from one to the other without allowing self or intercrossings, okay? So not allowing cutting and pasting. So this is how we classify knots and links, and here you can see in this table a few that are shown to be non-equivalent, okay? All right, and then of course this is a more complicated theory, and then you have functions which for any such thing in 3 dimensions or using a projection of it on a plane, you can study, try to find functions that distinguish between equivalent and non-equivalent knots and links. The question, however, since the 60s, it remains, can tools from knot theory provide information relevant to mechanics? People think that it is not actually relevant because it has to do with the global structure, but we are more interested in the local constraints and so on, and other arguments. But the main problem is to prove that this actually, to say that it does or it doesn't matter, is that knot theory, knots and links are, as I said, simple closed curves. And anything that is open, that has distinct end and starting point, this is mapped to trivial in knot theory, because if it has open arcs, you can always disentangle it and make it linear, right? With the notion of equivalence I just said. Okay. Also, knots don't care about the geometry. It doesn't matter. You can transform anything. It just wonders if one thing is equivalent to the other. So there are some obstacles in applying the theory to systems, because systems of polymers don't necessarily have open arcs, have closed curves. More usually they are open, okay? So that is the first problem. But it's not that bad, because there is a measure of topological entanglement which can be applied to open curves. So the simplest, one of the simplest actually measures of entanglement. You assign an orientation to your curve, or 2 curves in space, and you project them on a plane. On that plane then, you will see crossings of one or the other type. And then to each type of these 2 crossings, you assign a number. You look at the diagram, you measure, you account the algebraic sum of these crossings. Counting plus, minus, you add them all together, you get a number. It turns out this number is, if you are talking about closed curves, a topological invariant. That means it does not change as long as you don't allow the curves to cross through each other, okay? So it also measures the number of times one curve turns around the other. So this is the physical meaning of this, this algorithm that I described with projecting on a plane. It measures how many times one curve goes around the other. However, it is a very weak topological entanglement. For example, you see here some cases. This linking number is 0. This is 1, as you expect. This is 2. It is more complicated than that. But this one, which is actually linked, you see, you cannot take one out of the other. This gives you 0. So there are things it misses. But it is good for us. It is good enough for us because this linking number that I described, it can be applied to open chains as follows. So actually, it was first given by Gauss in his studies of electromagnetism. And it had the form of this double integral. So what this double integral does, actually, is, we said, you take a projection and you do this sum of crossings. But when you have open chains, this is no longer topological invariant. And if you choose another projection for what you have, it might give a different number of crossings. For example, I have these two open arcs, right? If I project them right down on the ground, there is no crossings. But if I project them there will be a crossing. So take the average over all possible projection directions. That is what this linking number is. It is the average, it is, in a sense, the expected algebraic sum of crossings you will see in any projection direction. Okay, so this integral, it has the same meaning in open closed chains, but in closed it just doesn't depend on the projection, it doesn't change, as we said, in ambient isotopy. Okay, so another good thing is that it is a continuous function of the chain coordinates when we have open chains. And it is sensitive to the geometry. If the chains move a little bit, this number will change. For example, if we had closed chains, it is always an integer, and it would be 1, for example, for these closed chains that you see there. If you open them by a little bit, these are opened by 0.1 distance, each one. You see the number, it is intuitively what we would say these two things are linked, and the one goes around the other once, right? Well, it is not exactly 1, it's 0.98. Another interesting fact about the linking integral is that it is some sort of, let's say, some sort of interaction of things, even if they are far apart to edges, let's say, which we don't know if we would, it's not clear if intuitively we would say they link or not. This number is non-zero, but it decreases as the distance between them increases. So for our purpose, this is interesting because we want to know when two molecules are coming close enough so that they could provide some interaction, or when they are far enough that would be very low. Okay, similarly, we can apply this integral over one curve to measure how much it self-entangles with itself. And now here you can see how the information that we would get is different from the information that they would obtain through the algorithms in polymer physics. For example, that could be, both of them could be chains in an area of obstacles, in a melt. And if you would apply the algorithm, you would find 6 obstacles for both chains, right? But the one you see, you can just pull it out. Let's say, let's imagine it was so simple. It will go out of the obstacles. If you pull the other one, you will just tighten up the entire thing, okay? So the right of the first one is almost 0. The right of the other one is 2.7. So these give complementary information. Okay, so that's great news. We have a tool of entanglement. We go on to apply it. But the problem is now that we cannot actually, we don't have pictures of those things. You cannot see, they are very dense, all these. Maybe you can find, with a lot of work, pictures of DNA being entangled and see what node type it gives. But melts, you cannot see anything. So what we do is molecular dynamic simulations. And now, when you do molecular dynamic simulations, the degrees of freedom are so high that you cannot actually simulate the entire system. On the other hand, you cannot restrict yourself only to simulating a few chains, because you will have boundary effects. So you have to use periodic boundary conditions. That means you simulate a few monomers, and then at the edges, so this is a cartoon representation. Imagine you have a box, okay, with periodic boundary conditions in every pair of opposite faces. Whenever a chain exits one face, a molecule, it re-enters from the opposite face, okay? So once this happens, your system actually whatever is created by gluing all these faces of copies of the box. So you are simulating an infinite system. The idea behind it is that the system should be homogeneous. Wherever you look, you would see the same thing, so it's okay if you use this artificial way of simulating it. Okay, why is that important? Why do I mention? Because now, when we have entanglement in such a system, we will have an extra complication. So these are, again, cartoon representations, oversimplified, of a two-dimensional system. We will care about 3 dimensions. And you see a system where you might have open chains. The A, you see, it doesn't close. The chains don't close. You might have A is the closed ones. B, they are open. C, you might have infinite curves. Okay, so now let's measure the average linking number in this system. Okay, let's go to the first one. Well, if I do average linking number here, I have to count all pairs of linking numbers, right? So I will take linking number of that with that, linking number of this with this, of this with that, of this with any other image. So we are talking about an infinitely many pairs, right? But you might say some things are so obviously not linked, the linking number of those will be exactly 0. That is true. So actually, that can be a finite sum. I can get a grain of only finite information that is repeated throughout. Okay, but let's do that here. Here now, if I go to compute the average linking, you can see that any pair of curves, they are in different relative positions, which means their integral will be different, the output of the integral. You no longer have the nice property of two things being further apart, this is equal to 0. It has some contribution. Similarly, in this case. Okay, so what we do is propose to define the linking number, the periodic linking number. It is the same idea almost as what I said before. So what we do is we unfold one image of the, one image, let's say of the blue curve, and we take the sum of linking numbers of this blue curve with all the images of the red curve, all the images. Okay, so this we call periodic linking number. So for this one, it would be the linking number of I0, let's say, with J0. I start from 1 here. And so all the pairs of linking numbers. So as I just said, in case of closed curves, that will be a finite sum, because you have a finite number of curves that will give non-zero linking number. But in these two cases, this will be an infinite sum. So I wanted to mention earlier that there are other ways we could have tried to define a linking number there, but they won't work. We can go over those later. However, we prove with a lot of work that the periodic linking number converges. So this is an infinite sum in those cases, but it converges. We give also upper bounds for it, and we show it is a continuous function of the chain coordinates. This is also a symmetric measure. It doesn't matter if I unfold the one image of the blue curve and I take all the linking with the red curves. I can do this for one red curve and add up all the linking it experiences with all the blue curves. Obviously, it doesn't depend on which image I take. So we extract a unique information that is then a grain that has no repetitions, but that is repeated infinitely many times in the system. Okay. So we can discuss about this, how we prove that later. And now we are ready to go on and apply this. So the criticism a lot of times has been when finding knots, for example, in biopolymers or DNA and things like that, that these are special cases and you find something very complicated, so you detect it with tools from knot theory. So what we will do here is look at systems that are very simply organized, very weak entangled, and show that even for those weakly entangled systems, our measures measure entanglement such that it correlates with material properties. So if we go, of course, to a more complicated system, that will show even more. So what we will do is we will look at 4 different systems. They will have a form of a weave. So the first one, the weave 0, it will be just parallel curves. The second one, it will be an orthogonal weave, okay? So parallel curves in 3 directions. And the second one will be the wave 2, the third one for us here. It will be a denser version of this. And this one will be an alternate weave. So you will have curves going over and under now, okay, for those they meet from opposite directions. Okay, and what we will do is we will study this system. So this is in 3 dimensions. We will do a simulation in the case where the chains extend to infinity, and in the case where the chains are finite, and actually very short. So chains that are in polymer physics, they are in a gray zone of not yet in the entangled system, in the entangled regime. Okay, so these are some parameter simulations. We will have harmonic bonds and harmonic angle constraints. So we will have semi-flexible chains, Lennard-Jones potential to impose uncrossability, and we will have a Langevin thermostat. So we will be using lamps for the simulation. And what we will do is an oscillatory shear experiment. So that means the following. We have our box, 3-dimensional box, and you keep one face fixed, and then on the top face, you move it in a sinusoidal, following this sinusoidal. That means that the coordinate of this, of this vertex changes as shows this function following this sinusoidal, okay? And then what we do is we keep track of the stress. And then we do this, of course, for different frequencies. We do it fast, and then we do it slower. We do it for 20 type of different frequencies. Now what happens is the stress, as I said, the deformation we do is sinusoidal, right? Almost like this. But what you will see is that the stress, it doesn't follow exactly the sinusoidal. It has a phase lag. So if the phase lag is 0, your material would be a solid. And if the phase lag was pi/2, that would be more representative of a liquid. The idea is you move this object. If it is a solid, everything will move wherever you take it. But if it is a liquid, there will be, of course, a freedom for the molecules to move wherever they want. Okay, so what we do then, as we measure this stress, we do a least squares fit to this function. Wherever the where the part that is with the out of phase part, the coefficient there, G2, represents how liquid-like is the material, and the coefficient which is with the part that is in phase with the formation, represents how solid-like is our material. So we call them loss modulus and storage modulus. Okay, so I will show you a little bit how these look like. So this is the simplest weave. This is 3-dimensional, okay? Don't forget, and infinite and open. Oops, sorry. Okay, so you see we move it. The chains are moving. These are infinite chains. I just have shown a small portion of them. You see they move. The interesting thing is that they form these bundles. We can discuss about it later. And then you see the open version. Now the chains, these are open. They're not infinite. So you see they can rearrange in space, and they try to find conformations that are of least stress for them. Now the infinite chains, oops, sorry. This is the other weave. It has now orthogonal weave. These are infinite chains. I just show one image of each one, okay? So you see again they rearrange, but they keep still the general form of the orthogonal weave. And then the other ones, the open ones, you see they really try to attain random conformations, but you see now in comparison to the previous one, they can't totally disconnect, okay? Because there is more entanglement. And similarly here, this is the denser one. I'm sorry, there is a problem in the visualization. There is no diagonal there. And the open version of that, you see now, even if it is open, it looks more like the corresponding infinite one, just because it cannot escape the entanglements. And then we do the same for the orthogonal weave. This is what we see in after running the simulation for a while. So the periodic systems, they look a lot alike what they were in the beginning as we started. The open systems rearrange a lot, but you see as we increase the complexity, there is more and more propagation of entanglement. So if you look the first one, it forms just blobs, and actually they're not entangled if you look, they are all separated from each other, they're just going closer together. The other one, it creates like tubes of things that are all interlinked. This one, it tries to propagate entanglement now in 2 dimensions. There are these layers that, it forms layers of entanglement. And the third one now, it has entanglement going in all the 3 directions. Okay, so now let's see the mechanical properties of this system. So this is now the elastic storage and viscous loss modulus for the infinite waves, the ones that cannot change drastically their conformations. So now we see in empty symbols, you see the loss modulus, which tells you how liquid-like is a material. In solid symbols, you see how solid-like is the material, okay? And now what we do here is we oscillate faster, this way. You start oscillating faster. And you see in all these cases, the blue and black, you have that the material is all the way from, even for low frequencies, more solid-like than liquid-like. Okay? And this is something that is expected for cross-linked polymers. What are cross-linked polymers? Polymers that cannot change their conformations because their entanglements are actually links. So they cannot slide through each other. They are really bonded. And ours are, since they are infinite, it is as if they are bonded to infinity, to something. Okay? So this is something that we could expect. And the exponents are similar to what we would expect for such systems. The last one, the one that is the most entangled, we see that there is a variation. So that is, of course, because it is very entangled, but also it is a lot out of equilibrium. And for this system for this experiment to exactly show this result, the expected behavior, you have to go at really, really low frequencies, and maybe this is too high frequency for that to show. Okay, let's see the open chains now. The open chains, we see a totally different behavior. We see the empty symbols, which represent how liquid-like is a material, to be for low frequencies of oscillation, the ones towards the y-axis. You see it is more liquid-like. All the materials for low frequencies, they behave like more liquid-like, but then when you increase the frequency, you see a transition at almost the same time, but a very little difference there is in the time, I must say, between each system, where it starts behaving more like solid-like. Each one crosses its corresponding liquid-like and starts behaving more solid-like. Okay, so this is expected for entangled polymers, but however, the exponents that we see here for this behavior is representative for that gray zone where you don't still have what is called in the theory entangled systems. So it is really a system that one cannot say that is very entangled. And here now we see the topological parameters. You can see the tangent that I have there, it is actually the ratio of loss modulus over storage modulus. So you can imagine it as if, as we move into that direction, from solid-like we go to liquid-like behavior in the material. And I am showing the results only for the open chains, which I'll actually show a transition. And you can see that the Reich classifies all the systems within what system it is. And these are systems results for different frequencies. It groups them together, and also it groups them from more entangled to less entangled. That might be counterintuitive why you would say the Reich is increasing for less entangled, because in that Reich is a measure of self-entanglement of the chains, and in this case, when the chains have more space, they tend to, we started from straight conformations, but then when they have more time to diffuse, they go to random configurations, random coil configurations, and the Reich that we see up there, the highest Reich, is that of a random coil. So the first ones are tied together, and they can't attain random configurations. Then here's the periodic linking number for these systems. And here we see a dramatic separation between the almost unentangled systems and the more entangled system. And we see again it groups together the different material, the different responses. And it shows that the more solid-like, the more entanglement there is between pairwise entanglement, the higher the periodic linking number. So that tells us that that is a proof for us that measures of entanglement from knot theory could provide information relevant to mechanics, and they should be included in theories. And of course, many more experiments in more realistic systems, they could prove that. Let me say that next we would like to use what is the role of the solvent. We would like to check what is the role of the solvent. And what I did is I used the Langevin thermostat, so just Brownian motion moving things around. But what about correlations within the fluid? That can become especially important in systems like the cytoskeleton, where you have active matter pushing fluid around, and that could actually change the material response that we see. And that's something we would like to work on here at UTC. Oops, sorry. So I think I have maybe 5 more minutes. Or is it too much? Okay. All right. So that's one place where we can find entanglement, and this is, I think, evidence. We provide evidence that it can be useful to use tools from knot theory. But what about proteins? And there has been a lot of work done on proteins and entanglement. There is actually a big or maybe let me tell you a little bit about proteins first, for those who don't know. So you have, again, the interplay between microstructure and macrostructure. You have a sequence of amino acids. This is from the data bank, both pictures, protein data bank. So you have a sequence of amino acids. And that sequence of amino acids, it is unique for each protein. And you can, and then the protein looks like this, okay? This is, again, bonds connected, amino acids connected by bonds. And what is interesting is that from this extended structure, the protein, in order to function, it has to attain this folded, as we say, conformation that you see there. And if it does not attain this precise folded conformation, which is just a conformation within a small subspace of the space of possible conformations for such a coil, if it does not attain it, it won't function. So it is very important. It's tertiary, it's three-dimensional conformation. So why is it so important? And how can we use that to say any helpful information in biology? So another thing we notice is that there are some patterns that are repeated in proteins. For example, proteins, they can attain, many proteins, they have something that is called beta sheets and alpha helices. That is those conformations that you see with arrows and the helices. These are some patterns which are just very favorable. Certain bonds, they like having this conformation, so you see them appearing a lot in proteins. So this is what we call secondary structure, the sequence of alpha helices and beta sheets. So our goal, our question is now, okay, we have a protein. How can we, a way to study how it goes from straight to be that thing, right? Because at least that would tell us, the way it goes from one to the other would tell us some information of why that is important. That is the idea. So let's study what scientists have been doing a lot is study how fast it goes from extended to folded. Okay, what we want to do now is try to, by studying the topology of the folded, what do we call the native state of the protein, if we can say how fast it went there, by studying just its topology. To say, just by looking at the end picture, how it got there. So first of all, let's see if we can relate it to folding rates. So let me say something else first. If we just measure the Reith self-entanglement of a protein, we see a small correlation with the folding rates. And what we notice is that these patterns of helices or beta sheets, these are not important. These are more local information that is just or they are not important, I shouldn't say that, but it is a speculation that it might not be important. So we might not want to account for these helices. These are local things that are formed just because locally it is favorable, but why globally does it wrap around itself? So instead of measuring the width of the entire coil, what we do is we measure the width of what would be if we had no helices, if we replace the helix by a tube. Similarly, let's do the same for the beta sheets. Replace them by a tube, so you don't account for that noise that is happening there in the width. And then we provide, and we can discuss why this is the case, the width of let's call this again primitive path, the backbone, without taking account helices and strands, to be the width of the protein minus the width of the helices and the width of the strands. And just that, which is still a very pretty measure, very simple measure of entanglement, we see a correlation which, for that type of data, it is strong. Okay, the R squared is 0.48. What is more interesting in the data? Okay, we see that as the folding rate is decreasing, that means these are all proteins of almost the same length, I must say, and they are all two-state proteins because there could be multi-state. Maybe we don't have time to discuss about that. So they are a relatively homogeneous group of proteins. And we see that some of them, you see this is a logarithm of a folding rate, they fold 1,000,000 times faster than others, okay? So the question is, why is that happening? And we see that, well, if it folds very slowly, that means it takes a long time to find the conformation it needs, right? And we see that the right, definitely it has some correlation with this protein folding rate. More interestingly, we see that the harder it is for a protein to fold, the more negative is the right. And why is that interesting? Because, for example, the alpha helices, they have a handedness. There is a handedness in a lot of natural systems. And proteins, they seem to have a right-handedness. And what we see here by the right, which doesn't account now helices and all that, it accounts a global conformation. We see a transition from right-handed to left-handed conformations in the proteins. So this is very recent work with Kevin Plaxcore from the Department of Bioengineering. What we also do, and I haven't prepared here for you, is we study out the relative geometry, the relative orientations of secondary structure elements to see if we can get information by breaking down. The right is the entire global entanglement. If we can break down in smaller pieces to see what is happening where, if we can determine some sequences of amino acids that play an important role. Okay, and since you are here, maybe I can just mention, so that since I am also presenting some of my, the things I'm working on here, if anyone is interested, just very briefly, that I'm also working on polymer brushes. So polymers can have different architectures as well. They might have, I talked about linear chains, how they are different by closed chains, but they might also have branches. And there we have a method where, well, this type of molecules, they are now very, very interesting in applications from what I understand, because you can create from those materials that have interesting mechanical response without the presence of solvent. And so that's the behavior of the material changes with depending on how many arms you have on this chain and how long are the arms compared to the length of the chain. And we show that actually you can keep doing that to change the material properties, but there is a point where you will have a phase transition. And to see that, you need to have much longer simulations. And we use the method of Professor Fredrickson from the Department of Chemical Engineering, the field theoretic simulation. There you lose the information about entanglement. I will just show you that the results that we have so far, you can look at only one of these pictures and we can come back to tell you what are the others. You see that there is a nematic order transition shown by this parameter that increases You see it becomes yellow depending on how many arms you have and what is the arm length. We see a nematic order transition which significantly changes the material properties and may not be desired. Okay, and with that I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask, because I also run a lot of molecular dynamics simulations before, but your type of simulation is a little bit different than what I did. So, especially about the force field that you used, it seems you treat the whole polymer as a single molecule.
No, we have the monomers, right? So it's a bit spring model.
Not the atomic force field for that, but I saw you used the urban Kirkland model and the Landry thermostat. We also use the Curie boundary conditions, but we use all molecules, all atomic force field. That's totally different than what you're doing. Yeah, and also what are the goals for the environment? I just mentioned about the solvents for your particular.
So let me go to back to a little bit to the parameters. Oh, I hope it won't. Okay. Here. So we have the Lennard-Jones potential for repulsion, attraction, interactions. So this is what the molecules feel with each other. And then you have the harmonic springs, so that they have a strong penalty if they extend. And then you have the angle interactions, and then you have the Langevin thermostat, which brings the temperature in the system. So I'm not sure if this is what you were asking. So we simulate each monomer. We don't go into. So maybe you are talking about really atoms of carbon and hydrogen. We group all that into one. So it is a very coarse-grained model. It's not a particular polymer. It is what would be, okay? It doesn't represent polyethylene, for example.
I see. Because in my understanding is especially the water. How do you describe the water? So that it also
Yeah.
And another also maybe not related, because you are talking about protein topic. But now, because we know that a lot of proteins actually they don't have a stable 3D structure. These so-called intrinsically disordered proteins. So have you ever using your models to handle those kind of models?
So I'm not sure if you are referring to multi-state proteins. Is that?
No, they are so-called intrinsically disordered.
Intrinsically, no, I haven't.
Because these proteins, they are natively, they don't have the stable 3D structure. They're disordered. So if you, I think, and also these proteins, although they don't have 3D structure, they find a very important for the cells.
That would be very interesting to study, also in comparison with those that fold fast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eleni, just a few questions. First of all, it's very good that we are on this screen. Is this, that Langevin equation, is that the stochastic differential equation, or that's just coincidence in notations?
Is it what, sorry?
Is this stochastic differential equation? Is
Oh.
it the noise or what?
Yes.
And remind me, please, B is what kind of noise?
B was a Brownian motion, so that would be.
Okay, and then how do you understand the solution of this equation? As Stradanovich equation or whatever else?
I don't know really. I don't know what is the solution.
So that noise physically comes from what?
It comes from the fluid. It is a fluid around. We don't simulate it. So
Okay. I understand this. Then about periodic boundary conditions. For me, periodic boundary conditions always are associated with a differential equation. What kind of equation do we have, or that's another story?
So here we don't need periodic boundary conditions in that. We don't solve the equations of motion in this. We only have the Newton's laws of motion, basically acting on the particles. And then the periodic boundary conditions are just whenever a molecule exits the phase, it re-enters from the other, but also a molecule interacts with images. So the potential that the Lennard-Jones potential, a repulsive attractive interaction, if it is the minimum image criterion, so it won't interact only with whatever is around, this won't interact only with those, it will also interact with whatever is on that side, as if that was here.
That's kind of, you form kind of torus?
Yes. So that would be
how do you choose the size of this cube?
Yeah, that is another issue, that you want to make sure you choose a large enough cube so that you don't have finite size effects. And there are studies, but there are, I don't know of rigorous analytical studies of what is exactly the correct. So empirically, and also depending on what problem you want to study. So yes.
In that nice movies you showed, you used the words infinite, finite. Is that infinite related to periodic or not?
Yes, they are infinite by not having endpoints inside the box.
Okay.
They are infinite.
I understand. In this sense, and what is the result if we consider finite object? How does it affect the whole story quite fundamentally?
So yes, because the infinite, it had almost the same behavior. It was more like a solid. But the other one, it was open chains, it showed the transition. It behaved like those interesting polymers that behave under liquid in some conditions and like solid in other.
Okay. And one more thing, the meaning of this omega, the frequency, how was it chosen? Where does it come from?
So there you have, so we chose this frequency as, so that the periods are comparable. Oops. So the frequencies are determined corresponding to a period, right? And that period is determined with respect to some times that are characteristic for the system that we are studying. And you want to go to times that are very small. So I think our smallest period was within, or our periods are of the order of the diffusion time for the chains that we are studying. So you want to go to very slow periods. And that's determined from the molecule, from the length of the molecule, the density of the system. That tells you what are the characteristic times for the system, for that reptation, let's say, of the chains. If we can define exactly in our systems. They're not that entangled to define.
I heard a very similar story about creation of new materials based on the external field and that periodic story with torus. This is gentleman at Wusterbaum Tech. I will give you his comments later. And also you mentioned time scale. I don't quite understand how this is related to what?
To the period. Yes, it has to do because you want to capture, you don't want to drive the system too much out of equilibrium, because then you will lose the stress will not even have, it won't have any sinusoidal at all behavior. And you want to study this phase like between the sinusoidals, as we said, right? Because sinusoidal deformation and the stress following a sinusoidal, but it becomes out of phase. If you do it too fast, you won't see any fit to a sinusoidal for the stress. So the experiment won't work.
Probably it would be interesting for you to present it. Unfortunately, John Grafe is not here. He worked quite a lot on time scale problems the corresponding differential equations. I believe including stochastics, but I'm not quite sure. So it would be good for you guys to interact. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anything else?
Thanks for asking. Okay, so from my point of view, so when you build, you look at you drove everything sinusoidally, but what if you just look at your initial response? If you look at that, because that's from ancient chemical engineering study of looking at polymers and rheology. They just taught us, when you jump off the bridge and you hit the water, it's like concrete and you die because of the response of the system and its relaxation. It does not feel like water at a high velocity. So this clearly it matters in terms of the behavior. So you're driving it sinusoidally. You just look at to another space in rheology where they just look at the relaxation properties of polymers.
Yes.
So does yours relate back to that old theory from
Yes.
30, 50, 100 years ago?
Yes, so I think that you're referring to the Plateau Modulus. So the relaxation, when those systems, if you apply a stress and it relaxes, so sorry, I might not say that very right, but that the stress somehow decays as you leave it, relax, but it reaches a plateau because it is entangled. It needs some time to find its way until it drops. And this quantity where it stops for a while, this is called the Plateau Modulus. And actually the storage modulus that I showed there, as the frequency goes to infinity for very small frequencies, it coincides with this number. So they are related, but I haven't tried that experiment. I think it will require a longer time scale, longer simulations. And I did this simulation in serial lamps, so I was waiting for a long time. But now I want to go on to something like that and do stronger simulations.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. For closed chains, they are integers, and they don't change. But for open chains, they are any real number, positive, negative, and continuous functions of.
There is no stability, yes, in some cases.
Instability.
Slightly move it open and it will grow.
No, it doesn't. It is a continuous function. It is open, it is 0.9, 0.99, 1.
There is a continuity.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.